Now, we will look at ecology and its how people go about studying ecology. There are various ways in which one can look at ecology. Either you can look at the level of organisms, that means individuals of a particular species. I can take for example, particular tiger from a group of tigers and start looking at it as an organism, as an individual. Or I can take a microbe and start looking at that particular microbe, how it is interacting with its surroundings, how it is taking up food, how it is regulating its functions. So these are things which are individual based, individual of a particular species one can take and study. Or one can also study what are known as populations of a particular species, which means which is known as population ecology. So which involves how many of the members of the species is born, that means the birth rate, how many of them are surviving, what are they do not care about what are the causes of survival, but that is just a count of how many of them are surviving, growth pattern, what is meant by what is their life table, the population dynamics, which is for example, if we are talking about population of tiger in a particular national park, let us say, and what are the factors that will dictate the population of that species. So it could be how many tiger cubs are born, let us say, per year in a particular that habitat, and which can give us what is known as the birth rate per year. And then how many of them have survived, means let us say how many of them have reached 2 years or 3 years of age, or when we say survival in ecology, it defines how many of them have grown to adult age to reproduce and then trusted the next generation into the population. So then only you can call it as a survival. And then when we say survival of the fittest also is coming in the context of ecology, in terms of saying that how many progenies it could thrust into the next generation. Similarly, what is the pattern of growth? There are different ways in which you can analyze population dynamics, whether it is exponentially growing or whether it is linearly growing. So these are different growth patterns it has. The dynamics of the population, what are the factors that will be affecting the the birth rate, the death rate, the survival rate of the population. So which could be some diseases, or it could be the food availability, the weather patterns, all this can affect the dynamics of the population. And the population interaction and regulation, okay, which means how members of the community or the population or the species is interacting with each other and how it interacts with other species, let us say prey-predator relationships or predator-predator relationships, which are all important in the case of population. So it is not about individuals. So so one could, as I said, we could study either organisms, or it could be which could be either the individuals or the population of in a particular species. So the second way of classification is by looking at habitats, based on habitats. So the habitat itself one classifies as terrestrial habitats, which means terrestrial and aquatic. As you can see from the name itself, terrestrial means which are earth bound, which is non-water based. So, but at the same time they also have interactions with water, it is not that they completely are out. So, a particular organism, when it spends most of its life on non-aquatic habitat, they are terrestrial organisms. So, those are habitats which have examples are forests, grasslands, deserts, etc. So they are not covered by water. Aquatic habitat could be marine, which means it is an ocean or a sea which is serving as the habitat for different creatures. Estuarine is the place where a river meets ocean. So this brings in a lot of biogeochemical changes. A river brings, let us say, fresh water, and the sea brings saline water. So the concentration of salinity changes linearly as a function of as the river is approaching the ocean. So ocean brings more concentration of salt, and so you can see a gradation of different species that can exist and along, let us say, the stretch of that estuary. So you see these estuaries at the river mouths which meets oceans, which has a unique combination of different species that can exist there. Or it could be fresh water, means, so this is defined based on the salinity of water, mostly the marine, estuarine and the freshwater systems. So these are the ways in which subdivisions of ecology is done. The other important concept that one has to remember in ecology is systems concept. This is a very important concept. What we understand by systems, example human body if we take. So, it has many interacting systems. One is, let us say, circulatory system. So, it is easy for us to understand human body, and let us say we take circulatory system or the nervous system. So, it has also different parts in it which dictates it cannot. So, it is not working like if I take brain alone, it cannot work. So, unless if I have to show that my hand is moving, the brain has to give signal and it has to get transported through various neurons and muscles and other to get the message conveyed to the limb that I am moving. Okay. So, and similarly that same limb, when I am touching somewhere, I know that I have touched something because it is conveying back that message. So, in the process there are various paths that are involved, and then through which it is conveying the message. Similarly, if you take ecosystems, it is not a single individual or an organism, it is actually, as I said, different organisms of different species coexisting and interacting with each other. So, these interactions are very important for the well-being and the health of the ecosystem. So, we can call it as a group of interacting, interrelated or interdependent parts made up of matter and energy. In a broader sense we can define that way, that form a complex whole. So, that is what is an ecosystem. So, this may be looking very little elusive in its definition. So, there are, if you have to expand it, in other words, it also is a system which is self-organizing system. Okay, ecosystems are self-organizing. We do not go and play a role. And so, if you take human created systems, artificial systems we call them, there for example, we may have to put energy, we may have to put a battery there. Let us say an example is an automobile, it is a system, right. So, if it has to work, we have to put fuel there, and it has to have an ignition. So, there are various things which are controlled by an external agency like human being, especially in the form of energy driven devices. Whereas, in the case of ecosystems, they are known as self-organizing systems with the flow of matter and energy through the system. So, they maintain and organize themselves and they can change themselves. Examples of this is given, let us say a sun, a glass of water, a frog, a city. These are examples of system. Okay, when I take a glass of water, why is it a system is a question, right. So, in thermodynamics, for example, we define system with a system which may be either a closed system or an open system. So, in the case of ecology too, these systems have to be classified based on thermodynamic principles, and they work on the principle of thermodynamics. The minute you say energy and material is flowing in the system, you can imagine that it is dictated by the laws of thermodynamics. So, what we call as system here, a system can be called an isolated system. That means there is no exchange of energy or matter with the environment, which is very difficult many times, right. I mean, if you have to see an example of a system which may not be exchanging anything. So, it may not be, it has to be a system that is almost impossible for ecosystems to be in that isolated condition. The second class is what is known as closed systems, that is exchanges energy but not matter and attain true thermodynamic equilibrium with the environment. So, so basically if you look at a glass of water, for example, it is actually a thing that is exchanging matter because constantly there is evaporation of water molecules and going back, and there is exchange of energy, which is surrounding temperature is changing and fluctuating, and that is what is dictating. So, both are happening, that is why it is a system level, and you can say that it is an open system which is which is exchanging these things. Now, let us say you close the glass and not allow any exchange of matter. It will still have its energy in terms of its existence there, but at the same time the exchange of matter with the surroundings can be stopped. Okay. That is what is a closed system. Similarly, open systems, that is where both matter and energy can exchange with the surroundings. Thermodynamically they are not in true equilibrium, but are in dynamic steady state, because if you take, let us say, any ecosystems, an example, let us say a pond or a lake. Okay. So, basically what kind of changes are happening there is very difficult to monitor, because each individual or organism of different species are contributing in different ways in terms of generating matter, making use of energy which is coming from solar system, and then converting it into various forms of energy. So, this is essentially the function of an ecosystem, and which is exchanging constantly with its surroundings. So, if I take, let us say, a pond as an ecosystem, it is getting inputs from various sources that are surrounding it, which will be exchanging, let us say, nutrients from the surroundings. So, let us say there is water which is flowing into the pond, which brings nutrients from its surroundings. So, which is not a very controlled way that it will be bringing. It depends upon the flow velocity, how much rain it is receiving, what is the kind of transformation that is happening in the pond. So, at any given point of time, determining the exact amount of nutrients that is available in the pond is not a constant. It is constantly fluctuating or changing. So, which feeds back into, for example, so the living organisms or the biotic community of a habitat. So, this is now let us call this as an ecosystem. Let us say there is a system boundary that is defined here. So, inside the ecosystem, we all know that what is known as energy flow happens through what is known as food web. The nutrients are taken up by the primary producers or the plants, and various other inputs are also like water or temperature and other external factors will be there, which controls the production of the plants. So, plants produce biomass, and this biomass is taken up by primary consumers, or what we call the herbivores. So, in this case, let us say if I am taking a pond, it could be phytoplanktons and zooplanktons which will be there in the water, and there could be even some fish which may be eating some of the plants which could be surviving, plant eating fish, herbivorous fish. So, these red arrows are indicating the flow of matter and energy from in the system from one level to the other. So, these levels in the food web are what is dictating the number of individuals in each species and the number of species that will be coexisting in the total system. So, there could be possibility of different types of primary producers or plants possible in a particular ecosystem, because each of it will be utilizing what is known as a particular adaptation for living in a particular environment. So, the definition that is coming in here is adaptation, because you will not find the same type of plants that you will see in a pond in, let us say, in India. You will not see that in let us say in Siberia. So, this will be different because of the temperature that may be existing there, the type of nutrients that is flowing there. So, all these are dictating the type of species that can survive there and what can adapt to that particular climatic condition or the weather conditions existing there. So, these primary producers are eaten by, as we know, the herbivores or the primary consumers. So, the primary consumers in the food web will be the food web, as we all know that the energy and the matter is flowing, and they function with certain what is known as efficiency. So, how much, when we say that there are plants or primary producers in this first level, the questions that is coming to us are the efficiency of these producers. Efficiency to do what? Efficiency to produce biomass. Let us say you plant something, how much will it grow is a question in terms of, let us say, I can weigh at the end of the growth of that plant and see how much mass it is produced, which is known as the biomass. So, what is that biomass constituted of or constituting of? That biomass is nothing but the nutrients and the other inputs that is taken up from the atmosphere in terms of water. For example, plants grow by just the process of using water and carbon dioxide, H2O plus carbon dioxide giving you the glucose molecule. So, basically it synthesizes through the photosynthesis process the food that is required and grows in size. So, the biomass is added by the addition of this molecules that are available there, and so with some efficiency only these plants can work, like any other synthetic systems that we talk about, or for example, if I take a machine, I define what is known as efficiency. Efficiency is defined as the ratio of the output to the input, how much it is giving out. So, here output is nothing but the biomass at a given point of time. So, as you can also see that the biomass is also not a constant, the plant is continuously growing. So, at any growing stage, if you look at on day 1 it will have one biomass, day 30 it will have another biomass, let us say 100 years down it will have a different biomass. So, it is constantly assimilating biomass and also leaving some amount of biomass in terms of degradation or decay into the environment. So, basically you can see that all these components also have one connection to what is known as decomposers. So, if you take producers, herbivores, carnivores or secondary or tertiary consumers, they all decompose by the operation of microbes, and then some amount of nutrients are given back to the system itself. So, it is a kind of interconnected chain that we are talking about, and each level is defined by what is known as efficiency. How much is the output or the living biomass or the standing crop is what is called the term for describing what is the mass of that particular individual or the organism or a group of organisms in a particular ecosystem at a given point of time. So, as I said, it is a dynamic quantity, it can keep varying and depending upon various external factors, and the efficiency is defined based on these factors to calculate the efficiency of transfer of energy from one level to another. So, primary producers or plants have certain efficiency with which they operate. From the plants, when an animal is eating that plant, it transfers energy or material to the primary consumer. So, with certain efficiency again the primary consumer is going to operate. So, the primary consumer is going to even whatever is taken up, it will use for various body functions. One is growth, the second is like it may have to move around, for example mobility. So, that requires some energy expenditure. So, some amount of the biomass will be getting converted to these activities, and so it will be losing some of the biomass. So, the biomass that at a given point of time is net result of the food that it has taken up, how much of it is ingested, how much of it is assimilated, how much of it is what you call ejected from its body in terms of various the food digestion process. So, that happens in all the stages, and the efficiency of each level is dictating how each of them will be interacting with one another. So, this is what we study in school as what is known as a food web, but in gist it is nothing but an energy flow paradigm, and this brings us to various questions also to ask in terms of understanding ecosystems. And in all these aspects, the non-living or the abiotic has a major role in controlling the for example air, water and soil, and the basic elements and compounds of the environment. They control the climate regime and the physical factors like temperature, humidity, inorganic substances such as the availability of water, carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, nutrients, etc., and also the synthesis of organic substances like proteins, lipids. So, these are the constituents of this non-living or the abiotic part as an example in the system, but they are part of the ecosystem itself. So, you cannot take out one part. Let us say I can take out proteins or lipids from a living organism and say that that can be isolated and can be standalone thing which can make the system work. No, they are all just a cog and cog in the wheel of this the whole operation. So, some of the questions that comes up is in ecology are natural selection as an observable process. Is it visible to us? What we all hear that there is what is known as a natural selection process. So, the question is many creatures, why they have so many offsprings, or how many of them, for example insects, or if you take microbes, they have large number of reproduction rate is very high, and certain animals for example can have multiple offsprings. Why do they have multiple offsprings? Okay, why for example if you take many predator animals or primary carnivore, you will see that their number of offsprings are very high. In nature you will see that a bird may have 10 or 5 or 10 offsprings. Do they all make it? The question is like how many of them live up to the next stage where they reproduce and thrust the progeny into the next generation. And so, that is where the question of what is known as fitness comes in. So, fitness is not in terms of our definition of fitness, ecological fitness is another term that we need to understand. So, many times we misconstrue this as the physical fitness of the organism, which is not the meaning of fitness in ecology. It means how the progeny is being thrusted by a sexual process or a sexual process into the next generation. So, how many of them can transfer the gene from one generation to another is the only question of fitness here. Successfully means the next generation is surviving, and every species similarly has a niche. Okay. So, the niche is a term that comes in ecology again as a definition. So, this is to say that when we say species, what is a species is a definition. So, species is a group of animals which group of animals or organisms which practices a particular trade. Okay. So, it is like saying a group of teachers. Okay. So, they teach, that is their profession. So, they are equipped with the mechanism to teach. So, similarly, so here niche is something that a particular trade that they are practicing, and that species has a particular adaptation to make use of that particular habitat. So, an example we take a sunbird. You might be knowing that a sunbird feeds on nectar from plants. So, it has a unique, so what we call as sunbirds have a unique adaptation called long beaks, which again is suited to take nectar from flowers with long stalks, not any flat flowers. So, there is a unique combination of flowers with long stalks and sunbirds which have the unique feature of having the long beaks. Now, let us say this all the plants which produce this long stalks flowers disappear from earth. So, it is an immediate consequence is that, so tomorrow onwards sunbirds cannot be changing the beak length and then start adapting. So, that beak length adaptation is something which has happened over thousands or millions of years of selection process. So, that makes it a trademark for, they just adapt themselves to take the nectar from long stalk plants, and that is their niche. So, if there and then in that particular community itself, when I say sunbirds, there may be multiple subspecies or different species which are coexisting there. So, how do they, what is their niche again? So, the niche is they again may have a special adaptation. One may have a little longer beak, another may have a shorter beak, one may have a little curved beak. So, these are all adaptations. If you look at birds are very good examples for learning these different kinds of adaptation. If you look at water birds, if you look at them, you will see that many of them may have, some of them may have long legs, some of them may have long beaks, some of them may have short beaks. So, these are length scales where, for example, they may forage in the water at different depths. So, some of the long beak means it can go deeper into the water and forage food. So, that particular trade is being, so now if I say pelicans means all the pelicans will practice a particular way of feeding themselves in a particular habitat. So, that is so they have a niche, and at the same time they are not overrunning the earth. So, they are controlled, the population is controlled. So, that has this interaction between different species and with the intra-species and interspecies competitions that are coming into the picture there, which controls the population. Then time scales of ecology is very important here. So, this is not the, so in the blinking of an eye I have written here. So, in the blinking of an eye, for our purpose of understanding, a microbe may multiply 100 times when in the blinking of an eye, but at the same time we will not be able to see any other transformation of, let us say an adaptation by or a mutation by some other animal which may get adapted to, let us say the sunbird which I was describing. The adaptation that would have happened would not happen in a time scale which we will understand at all. Okay, that will be very, very small changes that will contribute to the changes. Similarly, if you look at the changes in the ecosystem, it is very, very difficult to estimate the changes that is happening with the time scales you may see. One of the contexts in which this is discussed here is the what is known as ecological succession. So, what is meant by ecological succession is, if you, let us say we cut down a forest, a particular area, and then leave it as such. then you will see gradually the changes that is happening. And there are examples in in the Pacific Ocean. There are some islands which were completely destroyed by volcanoes, and so eventually over a time period now it is completely covered by plants. So which is a time scale over which colonization by different organisms. So initially it will be microbes, it will be smaller organisms which will control the processes that is going on in that ecosystem, and then eventually takes over in the case of that volcano destroyed island. Whereas in the case of natural forests and other grasslands or other places which may be, let us say a fire has eaten up a grassland, and then how long will it take to get back to maybe the previous state or some other evolved state. So the ecosystem also has different states or dynamic states to which it is reaching, depending upon what are the kind of species that may exist there, that may come and colonize there, and that is interacting. So now the grassland is destroyed, how will it grow back? What is the reason for it growing back? Because there may be grass seeds which are embedded in the soil, and grass seeds are known to be very stable against fire. So basically they will germinate when the next time when the rain happens, and then first it will be the seeds which may have survived the fire onslaught. So which is actually a little bit of a selection process that is indirectly happening. So the seeds which could survive the fire will be the ones which are germinating in the habitat, and they will colonize there. And next it will be the interaction. Let us say some bird comes there and eats the seeds, and then it will interact with the surrounding, and it may be bringing some other seeds from some other neighborhood grassland. So it will introduce some species. So there are multiple exchanges that is possible. An ecosystem, as I said, is not a closed system. It is constantly interacting with, let us say, a bird flying in and out. It is actually bringing materials, or it will be taking materials out from the system, or there may be an insect which is pollinating here, and it may be going in the neighborhood. So this will also be bringing different kinds of interactions possible in the system, in addition to the other natural factors like water or air and climate. So in the context, there are few questions that is in terms of how the ecosystems are maintaining the biosphere, and so as I said, it is a larger, so it is not the ecosystem working in isolation. Ecosystems combine together and form the larger context of biosphere, and the global environment is controlled or dictated by the interaction between different ecosystems and different biogeoregions that is evolved based on the presence of different ecosystems in these regions. And as I said earlier, the ecology of the humans in this is also a separate entity altogether, because as a species we are not only so if you take any other species, let us say, they use the ecosystems only for basic functions. Let us say if I take a frog in a pond, what is its function there? So basically it uses the food from that is available to it from the pond, and then defecates, and then maybe breathes. So in this process it has only few exchanges that's happening, which is it is not creating a cloth, it is not creating a vehicle, it is not polluting externally. So these are things which we add as a species when you consider, let us say you put a frog versus a human, or a deer versus a human, or any other animal versus human. So all the wild creatures or the other natural systems that if you look at, they are using only the ecosystem services for the minimum existence, that is food and maintenance and refuge, and then rearing their young ones. And where if you look at humans, we have done a lot of modifications to the system in harnessing this energy in various forms, and also appropriating this energy. I would say the word appropriating, because we are appropriating the energy that is available for other organisms to increase our numbers. So there are some other equations coming in here, and if you one of the questions that I ask here is where do you put human beings in this food web? Should we consider as a in terms of the energy that we are harvesting, can we place ourselves in the link where as a primary consumer or a herbivore, or can we put as a carnivore or whether an omnivore? Where do we place ourselves? Is that is sufficient for placing us in the energy flow paradigm? So, because we are also using energy for other purposes like transportation energy, material energy for various functions that we are using. So, we take away a lot of other energy that is not taken by living systems that we find in the natural ecosystems. So, ecology of humans is something that is to be studied little separate, but at the same time we influence the ecosystems drastically due to this. So, this is a emerging area where we need to look at in a with the point of view that our energy consumption, how it can affect the existence of the biosphere itself. So, certain questions we will be addressing in the next few classes would be the definitions. As I said, some of the definitions we have done already, and energy and material flow in ecosystems, what is meant by productivity and efficiency of ecosystems in harvesting this energy coming from sun. How ecosystems like terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems function. The services again we have already listed. The what is the economics of these ecosystems, okay, how do we translate that in a very loose fashion. We may not be able to dwell detail, but it is important for us to appreciate the economics part of it. The resilience of ecosystems, how is it defined, how easily the perturbed systems can go back. Why biodiversity, okay. So, every time we hear ecology, we immediately correlate something to biodiversity. So, why biodiversity? What is it? What is its relation to ecosystem services and energy flow in ecosystems? As I said, human impact on ecosystems, their functioning, impact on climate change, and in a, as I said, it is a back and forth loop. We affect the climate and climate affect us. So, climate affect the ecosystems and health and economics. Similarly, stability of ecosystems, recovery, and is it possible to heal the systems which are disturbed. So, there are novel approaches in which one can look at restoration of disturbed ecosystems, because as I said, the ecosystem services are disturbed, it is affecting human well-being and other well-being of other organisms on earth. So, is it possible to restore or bring back the ecosystems to the to a functioning ecosystem. Similarly, conservation of biodiversity and natural ecosystems, why is it important as a question? Are there limits to economic growth based on ecology? So, this is a question that we need to address, because as I said, ecosystem service and functions are important for all operations on earth. So, we cannot have an overriding fact to say that we will get rid of all the natural ecosystems and we will run the whole system on an artificial scale. So, that is why there is a limit that is set by for economic growth when we define. Many times we are not taking into account the ecosystems services and the functions that is served, and unless we account for that, we will never be able to define economic growth. So, that is where sustainability definitions will come in, and you will have another module on what is sustainability.